Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really taking a close look at the foundations of American democracy, the mission for this deep dive, to understand what some analysts are describing as a coordinated campaign, happening right now actually, to fundamentally reshape the rules, the structures of U.S. elections. We want to explore how these efforts might be aiming to create a durable edge for one party. And importantly, what that could mean for you as an informed citizen and, for democratic participation itself.
Exactly. This really isn't about just isolated events, is it? It's more of a comprehensive strategy. And it seems to be unfolding, well, right now. We'll be trying to uncover the specifics, the legislative moves, enforcement actions, administrative changes, and then we'll try to connect those dots, see what the potential impact is on future elections, on the whole democratic process. It's really a look at how the system's guardrails are being, well, tested.
Yeah, that sets a powerful stage. So maybe start us off with the big picture. How would you describe what sources say the majority party is doing to the election system right now?
Well, what we seem to be observing, based on a lot of analysis, is a systematic effort. It's about altering the fundamental mechanics of how people participate democratically. These aren't just random actions, They look like a coordinated multi-front campaign to reshape American elections, specifically looking ahead. The core strategy seems to involve using executive orders, maybe to get around congressional deadlock on election law. Then there's a blitz of restrictive laws in states the majority party controls. And strategically pulling back federal oversight, the DOJ's historical role in voting rights enforcement. Plus, taking control of the usually nonpartisan machinery of running elections.
Okay.
Some analysts call this kind of asymmetric political warfare, using rapid, maybe unconventional tactics, exploiting procedural loopholes, while the opposition might be sort of stuck with traditional, slower responses like lawsuits or legislation. The apparent goal. It seems to be suppressing turnout among groups who tend to favor the opposition. Also, structurally eliminating competitive districts through really aggressive mid-decade gerrymandering and installing partisan loyalists at key points like election certification. There's also this reported blurring between federal law enforcement and, political intimidation, which could chill civic participation. The potential impact on the 2026 midterms could be profound. These structural changes might actually reverse historical trends for the president's party that might allow the majority to keep or even grow their House majority. Some see this as a deliberate push towards entrenching minority rule.
That's a striking overview. Let's ground this in the current political reality. What's the actual partisan balance right now in the House and Senate, and why is that specific balance so critical for 2026?
Yeah, the context of this 119th Congress is absolutely crucial. The federal government is unified under Republican control, but the majorities are incredibly thin, very narrow. And this fragility makes them really vulnerable to the usual midterm headwinds. Historically, the president's party loses seats. So this vulnerability makes every structural change potentially much more significant. In the House, the Republicans have a slim majority. 219 seats to the Democrats, 212. There are 4 vacancies right now.
So really close.
Very close. A net shift of just 3 seats flips control. The Senate is a little more secure for Republicans, 53 to 47. That includes 2 independents who caucus with the Democrats.
Right.
So that's enough for appointments, reconciliation bills, but not enough to break a filibuster on major legislation. Now, looking at the 2026 map, it highlights this vulnerability even more. Cook Political Report flags 21 House districts as toss-up or worse. Fair vote projects may be only 38 truly toss-up races out of 435.
So not many truly competitive seats overall.
Exactly. And for the Senate in 2026, Democrats are defending 13 seats, Republicans 22. Vulnerable Democratic seats include an open one in Michigan and Senator Ossoff's seat in Georgia, both rated toss-up. On the Republican side, only Senator Susan Collins in Maine is defending a seat in a state. Vice President Harris, 1 in 24. That's rated lean Republican.
No.
The open Republican seat in North Carolina is also a toss-up, one of the few real pickup chances for Democrats.
Okay.
And historically, like we said, the president's party usually loses House seats in midterms, especially with approval ratings below 50%. President Trump's approval is hovering around 45%. Yeah. So normally you'd expect Republican losses in 2026 big enough to flip the House.
Right. The historical pattern points one way.
Precisely. And that historical pattern is a huge motivator for the party in power to try and, change the rules of the game.
Okay, so with those tight margins as a backdrop, let's unpack how the rules are reportedly being changed. What specific new laws, executive orders, What's being used to change who can vote and how?
Right. It's a strategy with multiple angles,
Mm.
using presidential powers, leveraging those state majorities,
Mm-hmm.
often in a sort of 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
Executive action first, then try to lock it in with legislation. A key example is Executive Order 14248, signed back in March 2025, preserving and protecting the integrity of American elections. This order tells the U.S. Election Assistance Commission to change the national mail voter registration form
Oh, so.
to require documentary proof of U.S. citizenship, like a passport, effectively creating a national voter ID requirement, but through executive order.
Without Congress.
Exactly. Now, a federal court did put a preliminary stop to that specific proof of citizenship part,
Okay.
but it caused immediate confusion, and it really set the stage for more legislative efforts. And the impact could be huge. Estimates suggest maybe 11% of eligible voters don't have that kind of government photo ID readily available. And that number is much higher for elderly voters, minority voters, low-income people, students. Then following that, the House passed H.R. 22 in April 25, the CV Act, Safeguard American Voter Eligibility. This bill basically doubles down on the executive order. It requires showing citizenship documents like a birth certificate or passport in person when you register or update your registration.
In person, that seems like a big hurdle.
A huge hurdle. Critics say it would make online registration, mail-in registration, almost impossible for millions. Think about the estimated 69 million American women whose current legal name doesn't match their birth certificate because of marriage or divorce.
Wow.
Also, naturalized citizens, people with lower incomes, rural voters who might live far from an office. And beyond that, the administration has publicly talked about new executive orders to ban or severely restrict mail-in voting.
Mail-in voting, that became so prevalent recently.
Exactly. And also decertifying electronic voting machines that use barcodes or QR codes as framed as security. But sources point out there's little evidence of widespread fraud with these systems. Mail-in voting's been used securely for decades.
And there's a partisan angle.
Well, observers know Democrats have used mail-in voting much more heavily, so eliminating it would likely benefit one party over the other. Plus, constitutional scholars generally say the president can't just dictate how states run elections. That's up to state legislatures and Congress.
Right.
Also in 2025, at least 7 states passed new, stricter voter ID laws, often kicking out student IDs as valid, which seems to target younger voters. And this is happening alongside a rise in mass challenges to voter rolls by partisan groups, apparently encouraged by administration rhetoric and the collapse of cooperative systems like ERIC for cleaning voter lists.
ERIC?
Yeah, the Electronic Registration Information Center. We can talk more about that later, but its breakdown is significant. But perhaps the biggest, maybe least visible lever is the federal government stepping back from protecting voting rights. Reports indicate the Department of Justice, under Attorney General Pam Bondi, froze new civil rights cases, dismissed active voting rights lawsuits.
Like which ones?
Challenges to Georgia's restrictive voting law, Texas's redistricting maps, voter purges in Arizona, Alabama. This basically removes a key federal check on state-level voter suppression.
Okay.
And this pullback is kind of reinforced by that Supreme Court decision in May 2024, Alexander v. South Carolina NAACP. It set a really high bar for proving racial gerrymandering, especially when race and party preference overlap, which they often do. Makes challenging maps much harder.
That's a really comprehensive picture on voting access. So we've talked about who gets to vote or who might struggle more to vote. Now let's shift gears to how those votes actually translate into representation. That brings us to redistricting and gerrymandering. How are Republicans reportedly using redistricting, say, in Texas and Missouri, to gain an advantage? And what's the response, particularly from California?
Right, this is where things get really interesting in 2025. We're seeing what many are calling an unprecedented wave of mid-decade redistricting.
Mid-decade, not after the census.
Exactly. Usually this only happens once every 10 years, after the census count. Doing it now is a really aggressive tactic. The aim seems to be creating new, non-competitive districts that favor Republican candidates, fundamentally changing the map for 2026 and maybe beyond. It's a major break from norms.
So, Texas?
Texas is a key example. Reports say, following pressure from the administration, Governor Abbott called a special session in August 2025 just to redraw congressional districts. A new map was signed into law late August. Analysts project it could flip 5 Democratic-held seats to Republican control.
5 seats?
Through sophisticated gerrymandering. Techniques like packing Democratic voters into fewer ultra-safe districts and cracking the remaining Democratic voters across multiple heavily Republican districts. This dilutes the voting power of urban areas, minority communities, This specific map reportedly increased the number of districts with a strong Republican lean, R+5 or more, from 24 up to 27, while it reduced the districts leaning strongly Democratic D+5 or more from 13 down to just 9.
And legal challenges.
Filed, yes, but the timing. It's unlikely they'll be resolved before the 2026 elections. And seeing Texas, Missouri's Governor Mike Kehoe called for his own special session, also in late August. The target there seems to be the 5th District, based in Kansas City. The goal looks like creating a 7-to-1 Republican advantage in the state's congressional delegation by diluting those urban votes.
So it's spreading.
It seems so. But there's a counterexample, interestingly, in Utah. A state court there actually ordered the legislature in late August 2025 to redraw its map. The court found the current map was an illegal partisan gerrymander. It cracked the Democratic base in Salt Lake County across all 4 districts. So Utah has until late September to draw a new, compliant map. That could actually create a competitive district, maybe even one leaning Democratic.
And California's response to Texas?
California's Democratic legislature took a different route. They passed Proposition 50. It's a constitutional amendment that goes to voters in a special election this November. If it passes, it would temporarily suspend California's Independent Redistricting Commission.
Suspend the commission?
Yes, temporarily. And implement a map drawn by the legislature itself. The design is reportedly aimed at creating 5 new, safe Democratic seats through 2030. After 2030, the commission's power would be restored.
That sounds complicated.
Yeah.
That's slower.
It is. It highlights the procedural hurdles Democrats often face, especially in states that have tried to take the politics out of redistricting with these independent commissions. They can't just call a special session and ram it through.
Yeah.
But this whole wave of mid-decade redistricting, it sort of normalizes what used to be extremely rare. It turns redistricting from this routine administrative task after a census into potentially a constant political weapon.
A redistricting arms race, as you said.
That's the term some are using, yeah.
Yeah.
A potential race to redraw maps whenever a party gains control.
Okay, so beyond laws changing voting access and redrawing maps, you mentioned a blurring between law enforcement and politics. What role are federal forces like ICE or the National Guard reportedly playing in this bigger picture? This feels like a different kind of lever altogether.
It is a different dimension, yes. And sources describe it as a concerning one. We're seeing reports in 2025 of the administration deploying federal law enforcement, even military assets, in ways that critics argue serve political goals. These operations often target cities led by Democrats, immigrant communities. And the effect, some argue, is political intimidation, creating a climate of fear that could suppress civic engagement.
How specifically?
A key example is Operation Safeguard, described as large-scale ICE raids. There's reportedly a directive in June 2025 explicitly telling ICE to expand operations and focus on Democrat-run cities. It's specifically named Los Angeles, Chicago, New York.
Explicitly political targeting.
That's how critics interpret linking enforcement directly to the partisan affiliation of local government. And the impact goes beyond just the people detained. It creates this chilling effect in immigrant communities. People become afraid to interact with any government agency, potentially including registering to vote or actually voting. It suppresses civic activity.
And military involvement.
That's the other piece. Unprecedented domestic deployments of military and National Guard forces, often overriding state and local wishes. In Los Angeles, June 2025, the president federalized 4,000 California National Guard members, deployed 700 U.S. Marines.
Marines, domestically.
Yes, the stated reason was protecting federal facilities, but it was done without the governor's or mayor's consent. In fact, over their strong objections, they called it unlawful militarization.
What happened legally?
California sued, but a federal appeals court temporarily allowed federal control to continue. Then in Washington, D.C., August 2025, about 2,000 National Guard troops deployed. The justification was a public safety emergency, out-of-control crime. But official stats reportedly didn't back that up. Local officials called it federal overreach.
And threats of more.
Yes. The president has publicly threatened similar deployments in other major Democratic cities, Chicago, New York, Baltimore, always framed as restoring law and order. But the visual, armed military personnel doing domestic law enforcement, it's a powerful intimidation tool. Critics say it's designed to quell dissent, discourage public assembly, especially in communities of color, immigrant neighborhoods.
And the legality.
It pushes boundaries, raises serious questions about federalism, state sovereignty, and the Posse Comitatus Act, which generally bars using the military for domestic policing. By using federal assets this way, critics argue the administration is essentially creating a de facto federal police force, projecting power into opposition territory, bypassing local control, and setting a precedent where the military could be used against political opponents or to intimidate voters.
So we have changes to voting laws, district maps redrawn mid-decade, and now federal enforcement used in ways that critics call political. What about the actual nuts and bolts of running elections, the administrative side? Are there moves to control that machinery, too?
Yes, absolutely. Beyond the headlines about laws and deployments, there's what sources describe as a quieter but maybe equally significant campaign to capture the traditionally neutral administrative infrastructure of elections. This means dismantling trusted, often bipartisan systems and replacing them with more centralized, partisan-controlled ones. The goal appears to be ensuring political loyalists oversee every critical step, from voter registration right through to certifying the results.
How does that work on the ground?
Well, the foundation of U.S. elections has always been the local, county-level election board. But that's under assault in some places. Look at Georgia. A 2021 law, made even stronger by a bill, HB 397 in 2025, gives the Republican-controlled state election board power to suspend and replace local county election boards.
The state can just take over local boards.
They have that authority now. And reports say it's been used to pressure Fulton County, which is a major Democratic area around Atlanta. Court orders have apparently forced Fulton County to appoint known election deniers, people involved in mass voter challenges, onto its local board. And HB 397 also took the state election board out from under the elected Secretary of State's oversight, concentrating power even more.
Okay. What about other states?
In Texas, the legislature in 2025 passed bills putting new rules and restrictions on county election administrators, again, effectively centralizing power. One bill, HB 677, stops county election administrators from holding other appointed jobs. Critics say this targets experienced officials, especially in the large, Democratic-leaning counties.
And you mentioned ERIC earlier, the voter list maintenance system.
Right. ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center. For years, it was the gold standard. A bipartisan group of states sharing data securely to keep voter rolls clean, identifying people who moved, died, had duplicate registrations. Really efficient.
Sounds
Very. But based on what many analysts call baseless conspiracy theories, 9 Republican-led states, including Florida, Missouri, Texas, have pulled out of ERIC since 2023.
What happens when they leave?
The consequences are pretty serious, experts say. Less accurate voter lists, more errors, longer lines at the polls. And ironically, it probably makes the system more vulnerable to the kind of fraud they claim to be fighting. The replacement systems these states are trying to build are reportedly less secure, less effective, and cost more.
Anything else on the administrative front?
Yes, funding. After the 2020 election, private grants, sometimes called Zuckerbucks, helped underfunded election offices cope with the pandemic. But since then, 29 states, almost all Republican-controlled, have passed laws banning or severely restricting those kinds of private grants for election administration.
Why ban private help?
Well, the argument against was potential outside influence. But the effect is creating big resource gaps. Those 2020 grants often went to urban, Democratic-leaning counties that faced the biggest funding shortfalls. Cutting off that extra money means those places struggle to afford enough staff, modern voting machines, enough polling places, which leads to longer lines, worse service, mainly in Democratic areas.
And finally, these election police units.
That's a newer and quite alarming trend, according to critics. Florida started it in 2022 with its Office of Election Crimes and Security. Now in 2025, other Republican states like Georgia, Arizona, Texas are setting up similar units or giving existing police more power over elections. The stated goal is election integrity. But critics say their actions often intimidate voters and chill participation. They've made some high-profile arrests, often of formerly incarcerated people who were mistakenly told they could vote, for minor errors. The publicity around these arrests sends a message, especially to targeted communities. Voting might carry legal risks. It turns a nonpartisan administrative function into potentially a tool for political intimidation.
Wow. That's a lot of different levers being pulled simultaneously. Legislative, structural, enforcement, administrative. So the crucial question, if these changes stick, how might they actually change the outcome of the 2026 midterm elections? Can we model that?
We can certainly try to model the potential impact, and the cumulative effect of all these changes could fundamentally alter the 2026 landscape. Let's start with the baseline. Under normal conditions, historical trends. 2026 would likely be tough for the Republicans.
Yep.
President Trump's approval around 45%. A standard model would predict Republican losses of, say, 10 to 15 House seats, more than enough to flip control to the Democrats, given the current narrow margin.
Okay, that's the baseline.
Right. In the Senate, the baseline is a bit better for Republicans, just because Democrats have more vulnerable seats up for election. But now, layer in the manipulations. First, gerrymandering. That new Texas map alone is projected to flip 5 Democratic seats to Republican. The proposed Missouri map aims to flip 1 more. So conservatively, just those mid-decade gerrymanders could give Republicans a net structural gain of maybe 6 to 8 House seats before anyone even votes.
So that cancels out much of the expected historical loss.
Exactly. It potentially neutralizes a large chunk of the losses predicted by standard models. Then add the voter suppression effects. Even without a full National SAVE Act yet, the state laws, the court battles, the rhetoric. It creates a chilling effect.
Yeah.
Look at Kansas's past experience with a similar proof of citizenship law. It blocked over 30,000 registrations. Over 99% were eligible citizens who just didn't have the specific documents handy.
30,000 in one state.
Yes. Now imagine something similar nationwide. Estimates are 21 million citizens lack easy access to the required documents. Millions could be disenfranchised. Even conservative estimates suggest these laws could cut the eligible electorate by 1 to 3% among targeted groups: minorities, young people, low-income voters, naturalized citizens.
And 1 to 3% is enough to matter.
Absolutely. In close races, and there are many, that's easily enough to swing the outcome in dozens of districts. Studies on strict voter ID laws consistently show they reduce turnout, especially for racial minorities. Even a 2 or 3 percentage point drop in turnout in key urban centers could be decisive.
How does this play out in the Senate races for 2026?
It could be critical there, too. Take Georgia, Senator Ossoff's race rated toss-up. New mail-in voting restrictions, aggressive voter purges, the intimidation factor from the new election police unit. Critics argue this will disproportionately hit the minority and urban voters Ossoff relies on, making his re-election much harder.
Similarly, in Michigan, with that open Democratic seat, tactics targeting voters in Detroit and its suburbs could be decisive in flipping that seat Republican. So when you combine the structural gains from gerrymandering with the depressed turnout from these voting laws, the whole midterm prediction flips.
Flips completely.
According to analysts, yes. Instead of losing the House majority, the analysis suggests the Republican Party is now positioned to hold its majority, maybe even expand it by 5 to 10 seats compared to 2024. And in the Senate, the map was already leaning their way. These changes make it even more secure, increasing the odds they not only hold the Senate, but might pick up a seat or 2 from the Democrats.
It's really striking how these seemingly separate actions, an executive order here, a state law there, a redistricting map, all seem to weave together. When you step back and look at all these pieces, what broader patterns or critical themes emerge? Connecting the dots reveals, I think, 4 critical themes that signal some pretty fundamental shifts. First, what some call the entrenchment of minority rule through systemic distortion. The overall goal seems to be creating a system where a party can win and hold power without necessarily needing majority support from voters. Gerrymandering locks in outcomes, making districts less responsive. Voter suppression selectively filters the electorate. It's like redesigning the architecture so the outcome is tilted from the start.
So winning by changing the rules, not just persuading voters.
That's the argument, yes. The second theme is a profound asymmetry. Rapid Republican execution versus slower Democratic countermeasures. Leveraging unified control, the majority party pushes through disruptive changes, quickly executive orders, special sessions, often before the opposition can really mobilize. Democratic responses often seem constrained by institutional norms. Complex procedures like California needing a ballot initiative for its counter-gerrymander. It's slower, less certain. It creates this dynamic where one side is constantly playing offense, the other reacting defensively.
Okay, asymmetry. What's third?
Third is this dangerous blurring of law enforcement and political intimidation. We talked about IC raids targeting Democrat-run cities, using the National Guard domestically in ways critics see as suppressing dissent. It risks turning agencies that should be neutral into political instruments of the executive. And creating state election police units institutionalizes this further. Their purpose might be framed as integrity, but critics fear they're used to investigate and intimidate the opposition's voters, using the law itself to create fear and discourage participation.
Right.
And the fourth theme,
Finally, we're seeing what could be called the death of competitive districts and responsive governance. Aggressive mid-decade gerrymandering just accelerates the trend of fewer and fewer competitive congressional seats. When districts are safe for one party, representatives have less reason to appeal beyond their base or compromise.
Their main worry is a primary challenge.
Exactly. From someone often more extreme. This fuels polarization, leads to gridlock, and erodes the idea that your representative should be responsive to all constituents. They become accountable only to a narrow slice of the electorate.
So putting it all together, this deep dive has painted a really detailed picture of actions across many fronts. What's the bottom line? Heading into the 2026 elections, what's the state of U.S. democracy based on these analyses?
Well, the evidence we've walked through, drawn from numerous sources, points towards a fairly unambiguous conclusion according to these analyses. The actions taken by the Republican Party, particularly under the current administration in 2025, look like a deliberate, systematic campaign to manipulate the very foundations of the American electoral system. These aren't just isolated policy disagreements. They appear as a cohesive set of initiatives, legislative, structural, administrative, enforcement, all seemingly aimed at one strategic goal: to insulate the majority party from democratic accountability in competitive elections and to entrench their hold on power, potentially regardless of the popular will.
Through multiple means.
Yes. Through executive orders creating new barriers to register. Through laws designed, critics say, to disenfranchise eligible citizens. Through pulling back on federal voting rights enforcement. It's about rewriting the rules of who gets to vote. Then, through unprecedented mid-decade gerrymandering, it's about trying to predetermine who wins, weakening the link between votes cast and representation. And finally, through capturing election administration and using federal force as arguably a tool of political intimidation, it's about controlling the process by which votes are counted and certified.
And the impact.
The projected impact for 2026 is potentially reversing expected democratic outcomes, re-engineering the political environment so that the midterms, which normally act as a check on presidential power, might actually reinforce it instead. The longer-term implication. If these tactics become normalized, constant redistricting, weaponizing law enforcement, partisan takeover of election machinery, it risks creating a kind of permanent state of, well, democratic decay.
That is certainly a lot to consider as we move forward. This idea of a methodical effort to redraw the very boundaries of democracy itself. It's a powerful theme emerging from this analysis. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What happens to any system when the fundamental rules of engagement are changed so deliberately by one of the main players? What do you, the listener, think about the long-term health of democratic institutions when they're put under this kind of pressure? This has been the Deep Dive. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.